Buggs. She's an assistant professor at Florida State University with a joint appointment in the Department of Sociology and the Program for African American Studies, where she has been a faculty member since 2017. Her research interests center on culture, race and racism, gender, intimacy, digital life, and work inequity in academia. Most of her current published work explores how race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality shape the ways that people build and negotiate intimate relationships. Welcome, Shantel. Hi there.
Hi.
I'm just going to continue with reading out a bit because I guess then we get to topic, if I may.
Sounds good.
Yep. Your website says you also research and write about the representation of race, gender, and sexuality in popular culture, racial and gender inequality in academic spaces, and how online platforms like Twitter and OkCupid can create community. I like talking about your research examining how self-identified multiracial and multi-ethnic women navigate race as part of their online dating experiences. Maybe could you, without being too academic, explain us what it all entails?
I really just spent a lot of time talking to women who identify as multiracial in a U.S. context. That's one of those categories that doesn't easily, translate from, kind of across international contexts because everybody's definitions of race are different. So I definitely was talking to people who, for the most part, in a U.S. context, identify as multiracial, but as a lot of different backgrounds, and just wanted to know about their dating experiences, what was happening online, what was happening offline, and particularly how their experience as multiracial people was impacting that, because there has been some research published even by OkCupid itself and a variety of other outlets that suggested that being multiracial could give you an advantage when it comes to online dating, that there was something more appealing, more attractive about multiracial people. And so I wanted to know if that was actually what was happening.
And can you share with us a bit of your first results, or is this due for an academic paper still forthcoming?
Oh, I've published a few different things.
I know, but the viewers don't.
Sorry. No, so there is stuff out there to read, including my dissertation, which is publicly available. I think the big conclusion kind of overall that I came to is that multiracial people aren't necessarily having any more special of an experience than anyone else. The same kinds of factors around not liking fat people, not liking people of certain racial groups, people being exposed to certain kinds of, not kind perspectives, I should say, depending on their religion. All of that is still shaping even these multiracial people's experiences. So I would argue that they're not necessarily having something that is totally different, even if there is some evidence, when you look at thousands upon thousands of interactions, it seems that if you are multiracial, you might be more likely to get messages than people who are not. But again, that is disadvantaging, particularly people who are Black, people who are Asian, and advantaging people who are white, less that it's so much that multiracial people are special in and of themselves. It's something about their connections to whiteness that perhaps seems to be working out in their favor.
So then when you're talking about multiracial personality, or let's say persons, it means mostly it has only an advantage if this multiraciality also includes a part of whiteness. So
yes,
if you would be a mixed Asian, Black, or African American, then it would be a disadvantage?
Often, especially depending on gender. So, right, Asianness tends to work better in women's favor than it does in men's favor. Blackness tends to be even more of a negative against women than it is against men. So it's very much not a simple thing. And then when we get into things like skin color, being darker skin versus lighter skin, that also impacts this as well.
Wow. So let's say the old stereotypical racist theory of white being very liked and having a very dark skin at, let's say, the bottom of the pyramid still applies also in online dating apps.
Yes.
And then, of course, with many filter bubbles or echo chambers existing also in dating apps, are there secluded circuits where people are looking just for like-minded, skin colorish people?
Yeah. So there's a couple of different ways I would say that plays out. So obviously there are specific dating apps or websites where you can, like, for instance, if you are specifically interested in pursuing Asian women, particularly from Asian countries, there are websites where you can do that. But if you look at the more kind of what we would call general websites that don't necessarily have like a specific angle, so your OkCupids, Match, Bumble, Tinder, right? Any of these, we still see, even if you can't necessarily filter on some of the GPS-based website or apps like Tinder and Bumble, people still figure out ways to, kind of prevent themselves from either having to look at people of certain backgrounds, or, they'll explicitly state in their profiles that they have no interest in interacting with those people.
Wow.
And then when it comes to ones where you have filters, people literally will filter people of certain racial groups, as well as a bunch of other characteristics, out of their view. This is what some researchers have called basically a digital cleansing, because, in the ways that when you walk into a bar in real life, you can't just erase, the black people from your view, but on a dating app, you can say, I don't want to see black people, right? You can say, I only want to see white people or Latinx people or Asian people.
So then it's maybe a question that takes things very far, but I think ethnic cleansing as a crime is really punishable by international law. Would digital cleansing should it not be punishable?
I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I think where, at least in a U.S. context, where we would probably struggle with being able to implement something like that is because of this discourse of the so-called personal preference. And I think that there's some iteration of this, I think, across a number of Western countries and a number of other contexts as well, right? People will say that who they are romantically or sexually attracted to is just their preference, and you can't tell them who they should or shouldn't, like. So even though, we, I think, have a commitment, in the West and many other parts of, the world, to not discriminating against people and to not perpetuate ideas that could lead to ethnic cleansing. I think a big part too of the ethnic cleansing issue is that it's often perpetuated by governments, whereas this is an issue of the dating apps providing tools, in their algorithms for people to be discriminatory. And so some apps have said that we will not make it so that you can filter by race anymore, right? So they're effectively trying to remove that option, but that doesn't stop people from just being discriminatory.
No, but then if governments are, let's say, held accountable for ethnic cleansing, then of course a few of the companies that are providing us with these apps are more powerful than plenty of governments are.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is that we're never able to keep them accountable for, excuse my English, the shit that they're building in their apps.
Yeah. I mean, a big part of, the argument of my work is about how we do not, I think, take seriously enough who people choose to be in relationships with and who they decide they don't want to be in relationships with is a means of helping to perpetuate all of the, kind of racist and discriminatory thinking that exists in broader society, that gets embedded into law and policy and influences the workplace. I think we like to think that our dating choices and who we end up in relationships with, that's our own personal thing and that's separate from the rest of society, but it's not. We're all in the same bubble right together. And so I agree with your point that, you know, these dating apps and any of these websites have a lot of power to shape the social world. I mean, there's a reason there's been so much talk about the racism built into algorithms, and how all of these algorithms are driving, I mean, in some instances, right, you know, what is the word I'm looking for? I mean, basically helping to radicalize people into, you know, some terrorist groups. Definitely an issue around white supremacy in the United States. So there's definitely greater implications beyond just, oh well, people, you know, don't want to date people in that group, and so we need to give them the option to discriminate against those people.
Yeah, I get little signals here that we only have 2 more minutes, and I'm very sorry because I think it would really could be talking on for much longer. So I'm going to touch very shortly on one of your most recent publications, Dating in the Time of Black Lives Matter, where actually discuss ways that multiracial women are using social movements like Black Lives Matter as a special indicator for what people they actually like to be dating with. Could you maybe just reveal the top of the iceberg, and then if people would like to know more, they should get to your website?
Yeah, so I did not go into the research thinking I was going to be talking about Black Lives Matter or any kind of political or social movements. It was just, you know, I was going to talk to people about dating.
Yeah.
But I think when you are in the middle of, particularly when I was collecting this data, it was 2015, 2016, you know, so this is post a number of very high profile killings of Black people in the United States, and specifically in Texas, where I was conducting this research. So Sandra Bland had recently died in police custody. There had been a pool party where a young teenage Black girl had been tackled by a police officer while she was wearing a swimsuit that was like going viral and was this very, you know, kind of jarring thing. So that's what's going on in the world. And I think I've seen since that time, what we're seeing is, you know, people putting no Trump voters on their profiles. And even the apps have responded by people being able to put banners to support Black Lives Matter, Planned Parenthood, the ACLU. So this wasn't just kind of a one-time thing. This is, I think, been a continuing issue, especially in the United States, because of the political climate. So I'll say that part. But what they were doing basically was bringing up, well, what do you think about X issue?
Yeah.
And, you know, kind of using that as this barometer to tell them all these other things, especially for women who were mixed with Black. You saw similar kinds of bringing up around issues around Islamophobia for women who were either Muslim or were Arab.
I need to urge you to get to a point. Yeah, but I can totally understand. So I was going to say, you have a website where a lot of your research and publications are available. So I guess those people seeing this, and I'm very sorry for having such a tight schedule to touch on this very interesting subject.
No, I completely understand.
So your website, Shantal G. Buggs, Buggs with a double G.com, is where people can access your information. Thank you very much for joining us. And
happy
if you
to be here.
Yeah, well, come over here and do research outside of Texas and the United States. Wouldn't that be interesting?
I would be very interested. I'm very intrigued by context outside of certainly a U.S. and a American lens.
Then stick around, because we'll have lots more of technology, dating, intimacy, private life, situations being discussed here at IMPAKT Festival. Themed Modern Love this year. Shantel, thank you very much. I'm going to wave at you just like this. Thanks for being with us.